Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming out from DrupalCon or wherever you came from. We have a lot of people from just the general Austin web community. So how many people are here from DrupalCon? Excellent. How many people not? All right. Not bad. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Okay, so today we're here to talk about, and this will very much be a group discussion, the future of the CMS. So the theme here is, don't design websites, design web systems. I want to introduce this topic very briefly by discussing what it means to design for a CMS. And when I say design, I mean design with a capital D, like architecture, strategy, content, not necessarily look, feel, typography. But what are you going to do? What's the plan? Why are you making a website? Who's it for? What's it going to do? Right? So how many people feel like this when you are designing for a CMS? When you have a plan in place, a project plan or a look and feel or something, and then somebody says, all right, I want you to build this in Drupal, or I want you to build this in WordPress, or Expression Engine, or whatever. There's kind of this feeling of like, which one here is the design and which one is the CMS? So in many cases I found, when working with the design, I'm the sad soul on the left here. I'm feeling like I'm being led around by the CMS, and the CMS is taking a lot of the direction. So the question I want to pose here is, who is walking whom? Is it the design or the CMS? First, I want to talk about a couple of philosophies of designing for a CMS, and this came about as part of a conversation I was having with a relatively well-known design shop here in Austin that I will deliberately I'll protect their anonymity here. They started as a design shop and they moved into development, whereas we at Four Kitchens, and probably many of you here, started in development and started moving towards design. So you're doing a lot of implementation work, and then you started building up a design team and design skills. So there are two underlying philosophies to approaching a CMS and your design, your capital D design. There's the CMS first approach, which is admittedly what we use at Four Kitchens. The tenets are, the user's needs are very important, absolutely, no matter what. But there are many ways to satisfy them, not necessarily exactly what is outlined in the project plan or the design. And that the design needs to be changed to align with the natural behavior of the CMS for a couple of reasons. One is to mitigate cost, make it cheaper to build. And the other is to create a more maintainable solution. So the goal in what we build is to create a web system that is highly maintainable. It's easy to maintain, cheap to maintain. In the world of Drupal, we talk about don't hack core, right? So this is a great example of that. Don't hack core, because if you're changing core, it makes it very difficult to upgrade. If you're editing the files in core and you want to do an upgrade in Drupal, you overwrite those files, all those changes are gone, and then somebody has to go back and figure out what happened, right? So when we receive a design, or when we're working with a UX designer, even in-house, and we say that, all right, we've decided this is exactly what we want to do, we take a look at it and think, okay, well, we can do about 95% of that pretty easily in Drupal. And the other 5% might be really hard. So a lot of the times we might hear something like, we want inline editing. So when I go to a blog post, I want to be able to click on that title and change that title. And that's a whole other conversation for another day. But some people say that, and we have to tell them, well, if you wanted to do that, we're going to spend a ton of money, because that's just not how Drupal is built. Drupal has this idea of a whole piece of content that has all of these different fields in it, and you edit it and you save it all at once, and there's all kinds of technical stuff there. But we would then work with them to come up with a solution that's more affordable and more maintainable. Because if you're doing a lot of custom code, that's code that you have to continue to upgrade and support in the future. The approach of this design company was that the user's needs are paramount, period. You do whatever it takes to execute the design that has been determined. If that means, in their words, taking a hatchet to the CMS, do it. So execute the design as is, hack the CMS when necessary, create a complicated code base, it doesn't matter, deliver the design that you have tested works. Both of these approaches have merit. One values the end user experience above all, and quite frankly the other, the one we follow, values maintainability and the developer and the organizational experience above all. And the user's needs, quite frankly, a very close second. So, it's a philosophical issue. There is no correct approach, necessarily. So we're here to talk about the future of the CMS. Currently, this is how we think of a CMS. This is WordPress, this is Drupal, this is a whole bunch of stuff. Your CMS has a front end and a back end. It's got a database and content, and it has a presentation layer. So on the front end, you're dealing with things like a website, primarily, right? A website that can be seen on laptops, on tablets, on mobile phones, and maybe you have a feed attached to it. So that feed can go out and be absorbed by some other site or be exposed to an application or whatever. And on the back end, you have a lot of text-based content. You have media assets, videos, images, sound bites, all kinds of stuff. And you have a lot of user-generated content, comments and blog posts and all of their activity on the site. What we want to discuss today is the separation of the front end and the back end. And we're referring to this as the great decoupling. So the CMS is focusing primarily on the back end. And the front end these days, let's face it, when we say front end with the CMS, what we really mean is the web. We're not talking about all the many front ends. The web is one of many front ends. There are native applications. There are mobile devices, very specific mobile devices and applications. There are the feeds, of course. You have assisted devices like screen readers. It really doesn't make sense that we have engineered this whole suite of software that looks at a visual medium and tries to translate it to people who can't see well. We need to take that content and deliver it directly to them in some way. So why is it that we we bend over backwards and jump through all these hoops to build software that reads content to people, that parses all the markup, that tries to ignore the stuff that it thinks is unimportant, that we have to put in skip links, that we have to do all of that stuff. In 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to be laughing at all of these things that we've been doing. We just need a separate way for screen readers to connect directly to the backend and get the content for people who need to access it. We also have multimedia and entertainment devices like the Xbox, especially the Xbox One. It's called the Xbox One because Microsoft wants it to be your one entertainment platform, and everything hooks into it and not your TV directly. We also have closed networks. For those of you that saw Dries' keynote, this would be the idea of Facebook and Twitter and all of these areas where people publish content and read content in a kind of secured, secret garden kind of area. And finally, of course, there's this ever-present promise of wearable technology that, is kind of a gimmick now, but it will happen eventually. So we have to plan for it, because is it a year from now? Is it 5 years from now? Who knows? So all of these front ends have to communicate with the back end to pull out content, add content, log in users, provide functionality, do a lot of different things. And this really, we believe, is the future of the CMS, where all front ends are first-class citizens and where everything starts with content.
So everything starts with content, and everything starts with content strategy, content models, and content relationships. Just had a discussion today with somebody that why not just use Akamai for serving like the videos, and it's because there's a lot more that makes that video valuable. You have arrived, sir. Yeah, there you go. And speaking of other content delivery platforms, this is Siri, who tells me when sundown is, and that's all she's useful for. Anyways, so content and content relationships, and what makes that video valuable isn't just the video itself. It's how it's the metadata about it. It's how to find it in the episode, how to find it in the the guest that's in it, and all that information that makes it relevant. All of that is really where where a CMS like Drupal really excels, and where a lot of the thought leadership and a lot of what's really made it such a powerful platform has come from. So, as Todd really outlined a lot more eloquently than I probably will, it's not just different screen sizes, and it's not just responsive that's going to be driving the content delivery today and in the future. I spend more time on Flipboard and in the Twitter app than I do on the internet these days, and I'm sometimes far too lazy to actually go get my iPad. And I'm sitting on my couch in the morning on my iPhone reading content and long-form stories. So this is all just this is happening. This isn't really the future. content consumption, like the things that we're talking about as what we need to serve in the future, is really what we need to serve today. And yeah, so what's the problem with current CMSs? So current CMSs, Drupal falls into this as well, is that they're website management systems first, content management systems second, and then with a bolted-on API. There's the promise of Drupal 8 that it's going to be that there's going to be that the API is a first-class citizen. But when you get into it and when you start using it, it still is a website platform with an API that exists, but that's not at its core. The other thing that is becoming very relevant or very evident to lots of companies these days is that there are a lot more people who are comfortable, not just comfortable, who are skilled at producing experiences in HTML and CSS and JavaScript than there are developers for whatever CMS your company is standardizing on. Right? There are a lot more front-end developers than there are Drupal developers. Okay, David. And so this is our. And so this is where our thoughts are, where some of these solutions may start coming out of, and some of the things that we've seen be successful.
Thanks, Mike. So I always like to have analogies ready to help me process the world. I won't make any assumptions in that you know who Goldilocks is or what that is, but it's a fable, it's a story that was meant to teach us all some lessons about life. So in this story, a young golden-haired lady is wandering in the woods and comes across an empty cottage. And she enters that cottage, and there she finds 3 bowls of porridge, and she tests each of these bowls of porridge. One is too hot, one is too cold, and one is just right. And so she consumes the entirety of that bowl of porridge. After eating that delicious bowl of porridge, she becomes quite tired, and she sees in front of her 3 beds, one of which is too hard and too large, doesn't work for her, one that is too soft and too small, doesn't work for her, and one that is just the right level of firmness and the right size, and she falls asleep there. She awakens to find 3 anthropomorphic bears who are there, who live in this cottage, and shenanigans ensue. So, and the great thing about fables and myths and stories like that is that they have a lot of lessons to teach us. One lesson you might take from this is, in a world with anthropomorphic bears, don't go into a cottage and eat all the porridge. But more importantly and more relevant to our discussion here is that between these extremes, even maybe positive extremes, like so you might burn your mouth if the porridge is too hot, so if a cooler porridge is desirable, or a firm bed is good for your back. So even between these positive extremes on either side, there is some space that inhabits for you what is perfect, what is just right. So thinking about, I came to this analogy as thinking about sort of the future of CMS and thinking about not just specific technologies, say like how routing is handled in the system, or what the authoring experience is, what those particular technologies are, but really sort of the animus of a content management system, the general qualities of that system, so that covers the broad spectrum of all the technologies involved in content management. And with the large conference that's going on right now, I won't name any names, but we're dealing with a system that is quite mature. Actually, I'll just say Drupal because it'll be easier. So we have a mature content management system here. So we have iterated on the ideas of storing content in the system in that back-end space. We've iterated on the methods to respond to requests to the menu system, caching, and all of these things. And we've come up with a quite mature solution that we know that when we stand it up, we have a relative certainty that it's going to be okay the next day. That wasn't necessarily true in the very beginnings of our CMS platform. And I would say not just for Drupal, but for Expression Engine, as Todd mentioned before, or WordPress, or Joomla, other CMS solutions, that when the CMS product grows to a certain maturity, you get an experience that is reliable, that is secure not just from an information security perspective, but secure from an architecture perspective, secure from an approach perspective, that there is a shared way that we think about implementing solutions in Drupal and WordPress, whatever, that is going to be repeatable and deliverable and deliver results that we expected results. And that is something that is very valuable and around the storage of content and the relationships of that content. It becomes kind of a liability, however, when we think about presenting to new things that haven't even come up at design time at Drupal. So as we iterate on these versions, we have a pace that our technology grows with. And the pace around stable systems like how we store content, how we respond to menu items, how we do caching and things like that, that's a slower pace that we all participate in. And the speed, the front-end innovations are happening, or new platforms that we need to deliver content are happening in, or new ways of authoring content are occurring. And even the speed at which thought is happening, and so new ideas about what that means and how to do that and ways to approach that. That's moving at a much faster pace and at a really volatile technology space as well. So if we think about, as a general process, if we have a CMS where we have safe, repeatable, known solutions on the back end, that's fantastic. If we have on the front end that same process where we are implementing safe, repeatable, known solutions that everyone in the world is doing and all getting the same results, it's, quite frankly, is boring. Yeah. But conversely, in a space where we are implementing the very bleeding edge of technologies, the latest and greatest, the richest experience, that's a very volatile technology that's responding to brand new things where we don't have known and repeatable patterns that an entire community is talking about implementing and using to produce the same results, well then we have a lot of risk. And with that risk comes great reward. And that's amazing if we want to surprise people with the web. When you have a surprising experience, that first time that you were able to carry 80 gigs of music in your pocket, that first time when you were able to use your phone as a camera, not just as a image recording device, but an actual, like, this is a quality image that I can keep with me for the rest of my life. That was a surprising experience. And providing that experience to people really excites them and gets them jazzed about your product or whatever you're doing. So that's great for the front end. But that same volatility is really terrible for storing your content and making sure that it's there the next day, making sure you have a system that responds in a similar way, in a similar process. So when you bring that technology in that animus of the technology system that you have, that, quite frankly, is dangerous because you want that content to be there. You want those relationships to be stored. You don't want that to be volatile. That's not the space that you want that spirit in. So really what we're looking for is this Goldilocks moment between these two extremes, where we have, on the front end, the bleeding tech, the richest experience, the high risk, high reward, and on the back end we have very safe and repeatable known solutions with expected results. So in this space, we get that Goldilocks moment of just right. Our front end, our content authoring experience, is a disposable champion. Who can answer to that moment at that time and do exactly what's needed in the best way possible. But we have the stability, the bulwark, stalwart guys in the back who are always going to be there holding the shields, giving us that safe, repeatable, expected result. And that's the Goldilocks moment, and it's actually possible right now. So part of the reason to rethink this now, to do this now, is that spirit, that ability to have that stable backend is being enabled by the growing stability of APIs and API-driven experiences. They're coming to a maturity that our content storage systems are as well. So, or that we expect from our content storage and our content relationships. And so as those technologies are maturing, this is becoming more and more possible. So it's easier to find developers out there who know their specific systems rather than your CMS, whatever it is. That you can have really specialized knowledge, and you don't need to bring those people on staff forever. You can hire them out, and they can provide an Xbox solution, or they can provide a Glass solution, a customized, tailored experience to those specific things, and it's going to be cheaper and more maintainable. So the other thing is that with the diversity, things we can't even imagine are going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, and so we can't afford to predict that. We have to react, basically. And so that's going to make standardization and kind of like answering to those things more difficult and result in missed opportunities unless we have a system that is a decoupled space where we can have something that we believe in that is a linchpin that provides a known and expected system that we can develop on, and then hire out for those other pieces or have answers for those other pieces that are volatile. And I mean that's sort of the end of our prepared topics and whatnot, but we really like to open this up for discussion. I know you guys are experiencing a lot of these issues and a lot of these concerns, and so Todd, you want to?
Sure. How many of you have built a decoupled system? How many of you have not and want to build a decoupled system? Why?
Mainly it's like just having this or just having that flexibility on the front end for all the types of things. Because I like thinking about responsive with more than just a screen. It's basically whatever device is trying to consume that, whether it be screen readers, things like that, things that don't necessarily have a screen. You need to have your site respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Any other reasons?
We get data from a variety of different backends, and shoehorning some of those into our Drupal theme is not so wonderful. So having them all come into something that actually wanted all of them to be great.
Are you saying multiple backend sources on like an Angular import or something?
Well, so we have in higher ed, so we have our courses in one system, we have our marketing materials in another, and we have student information in a third, for instance.
Yeah, and what you want is you want to pull those into a content management system. Probably do some management of that content. Make some relations. I mean, it's funny that we think about it. Like when you start thinking about it this way, though, it actually is. It really is that, right? You want to take this. You want to take this content. You want to manage it in some way. Make some relationships between it. Like and that relationship could be that these two things belong on the same page together, or that this content is related to this content, right? And that's actually what we mean by on this page together, right? Because in an application or something like that, those that may not be presented in the sidebar, right? But that's really when it comes down to the core of it. Those relationships and it's not even content authoring that's necessarily the place where your content management system needs to sit. It's management.
It's
right?
sort of routing.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, an old term it's been around a long time is content syndication.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're managing your content there, but you can have print, you can have all of these other things like your slide with all of the different consumers of the content is there, but there's like physical things that you can do with it, and so I mean the decoupled CMS has been around for a long time. That was like one of the first rounds of them is decoupled CMSs from the website. That's a technology limitation, right? So now it's neat to revisit this again. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. This isn't really new, right? This isn't
really
like
old. Actually, now
really
that you
old.
guys are going back.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
and what's funny is that why are the reasons that why now and why are these things becoming more relevant? And some of it has to do with the fact that we have REST and it doesn't suck, right?
Yeah, it's basically V8.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, it's not like all these ideas. Like people tried to do this stuff with XML and all these solutions, and it was terrible. And nobody liked it, and it was because some of the underlying technologies were not really well defined.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear the mention of this predates the
Dude, this is
dynamic
so
approach.
97, I swear. Seriously, I was doing this
Totally.
in 97. It's like, yeah.
XML on BC.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
think the legitimate
exactly.
concern is that there's actually just more pressure on the ecosystem now. I mean,
Right.
we find it very easy to make this sell on the native app side because of the
Right.
vanity appeal of iOS and Android apps to the clients. Like they'll eat that up like crazy. Screen readers and things we haven't even tried, but it's an awesome. I don't even know if are there standards and stuff for.
Oh yeah.
Are there? Okay, that's just that's outside of my space for.
Well, standards
consuming-
for how to navigate the markup, correct?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's separate from. You're talking
Right.
about basically a separate.
I'm saying
consumable
skip the
server.
markup.
I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. I think that's an amazing idea, but the pressure I think on us as an ecosystem is really what's brought about this renaissance of this concept. Is that we're going to find irrelevancy if we don't adapt and embrace it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Well, the other thing to think about is that when all these those first generation of these decoupled systems came out, there really wasn't anything besides the web. So they turned out to be these these big investments, and we're going to build this thing, and it just turned out to be this irrelevant because there really was just the web. But now, go ahead.
No, I mean,
I syndicated all sorts of stuff. No. I was like print everything. No,
Yeah,
it was,
I mean-
it wasn't just web.
yeah, I mean, especially like in the technical communications community where like,
Yeah.
building manuals that needed
Exactly.
to go into, Windows help files and onto a CD, printed manuals in 5 languages for 3 platforms,
That's what we did too, like a lot, like in the video game industry.
Yeah, and I
like
think
we were
what-
publishing it
What's
back
interesting is that, like, I think the news media and marketing communities really latched on at a time when dynamic publishing brought in a lot of capabilities that those decoupled approaches weren't capable of at that time due to the technical limitations. And I think what's really interesting is as the technology has evolved on the web publishing side, we're starting to come back together where those approaches are actually viable at the same time that most of those organizations are starting to really feel the pain of having to rebuild their content and having to revisit long-tail content that has a lot of value but wasn't created or maintained in a way that it can be reused.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, step one in any of these ideas is really is again the content comes first, and finding way and making a storage engine or a way and a content authoring experience that makes your content long lived, right? Because that and the other thing that we didn't touch on is that making that API the contract, right? And that's the point of stability, because at that point you can have different backends, right? You can use the CMS as something that pulls in from different authoring experiences, and as long as it publishes in a predictable way, and not just predictable as in like the endpoints are the same, but that similar objects have similar structures and things like that, that it's easily grokkable. It's a good API, right? Then all those other front ends they can change and shift. The back end authoring experiences can change and shift, but at the center of it is this API, is this contract that allows the dynamic changes to happen independently. Yeah.
We're talking about the communication issue, but not about the standard of the content. I mean, there is not a standard for storing or modeling the content in WordPress in the same Drupal. Say like copy paste the same content, you store it the way you want it. There is not a standard say.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely one of the challenges. But on the other hand, there's no reason that you wouldn't instead of trying to concentrate on how we're storing the content, or how like different CMSs are authoring the content, let's concentrate on a way of establishing an API that we can that's flexible and that's established, that can really be put in front of Drupal or WordPress. That you're not trying to copy and paste content from one to another, that you're interacting with an API that produces content in the same way. Right?
Isn't that what RSS already is?
Well,
That's extremely limited. I
Well,
mean, basically, you're talking about a system that can reflect upon itself and get post an option or make an options request and get back more information about the fields that's available for this content.
So RSS was, and XML was one of those solutions, right? Like that we were supposed to be able to write these discoverable DTDs, and then like our whatever consumers were supposed to figure out how stuff was structured, but nothing. I mean, I've yet to experience where XML actually worked the way that it was, and that I reliably received XML that was valid, right? I mean, yeah. So it never really happened, but like there's new API sort of structures like HAL and collection JSON, and that really are making a lot more sense and add the flexibility and stability that are making some of these, again, like 1997 ideals, much more realistic than than a lot of the stuff that XML.
My point is more like in the migration, because the storage changes a lot between one version of Drupal to the other. We have to migrate it and translate one structure to the other instead of having one standard. Say you have in Docs version 1, and you can open a Doc version 1 with LibreOffice. You know, it doesn't matter the version. You have a standard set for that content. You can do whatever you want. I mean, the content.
Yeah. Again, the point of stability there becomes this API and this contract, where regardless if it's version 1 or version 2, that API that you can access that content through an API that both sides kind of agree on. So.
To me, like one of the big issues is not just receiving content on all these different devices, but also being able to enter content
Absolutely.
from anywhere and not having to go back to a single.
It has to go both ways, and it has to be more than content too.
Pull and push.
People need to be able to log in and have a single database that contains user information, because as we've all experienced, does anybody here actually watch Netflix on mobile devices? I don't. I might just be like a curmudgeon. Okay, so you log into Netflix through your app on a tablet or on your phone or whatever. It's still your account, right? But it's clearly like a very different architecture that's powering that. So that similar experience, no matter where you are, what app, what device, what context, whatever, you log into that system, you have your information. And on the back end, I have no idea how they're structured at Netflix, but I assume they're smart enough such that they don't have that information syncing to multiple stores based on the device that people, or the context, right? So let's extend that out to something like this, where you have users that need to be able to deal with a screen reader, an Xbox, wearable tech, web, and their mobile phone, right? So it's not just content, it's also the users.
Yeah, and so just to, go ahead.
No, just thinking about two things is, one of the things about that happened before, like 2 weeks ago I was listening to Steve Jobs talk. He was talking in 1986, 87, and saying that the goal was to put the computer in a book that you can carry everywhere and have radio signal, so you can read your email without any wire. I don't know if that sounds familiar. But that was 1987.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind. I mean, he's looking at it from the past. We saw that in the past, but we didn't have the technology.
Yep.
And it goes back to now we have technology. We have Angular, we have Marinette, we have, a bunch of stuff that can do so much on the front end that we can have an API that goes both ways.
Yeah.
Create a bridge between any standard in the content, any that is in the back end, and anything that we want to show on the front end. So I think the discussion should be how do we do that bridge so we can have the information as we want it. I've been starting a team for Drupal 8, and I want to, my goal, if I can do it, is that you think everything through SaaS. Don't touch templates as much as you can, don't touch anything, just SaaS. You move your grid with SaaS and make it look good. So if you can.
Yeah, I mean, that's
you need something to get the information from there, and that's what we don't have. Something that don't give me the whole menu dump. Give me the information so I can do that I want.
So one thing that I wanted to sort of just to circle back to the migration aspect of this. This really doesn't. That's not the problem that we're trying to solve, to be honest. But we are. It's not necessarily a cost savings, but what it does is it allows you to be more choosy about where you put your costs. Right now, to upgrade your website, you need to upgrade your CMS, right? But if those two are separate, you can upgrade your website, kind of what David was talking about, 3 or 4 times before you before you have to migrate your content.
Or you can upgrade your CMS.
I say a good number of our clients, we just go in and install services API and go upgrade on the front side with an Angular solution. I mean, that's actually what we do is we leave the CMS in place and we just leave it behind as long as it's reasonably performant.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Jeff.
I mean, one of the things that we've actually seen, we've been doing more and more of these decoupled things for a couple of years at this point, and Angular solved a whole lot of problems.
Yes.
But one of the things that I'm worried about is that there's a part of the process that a lot of organizations aren't used to, and we have to walk them through a lot of really tough decisions about the design decisions that they're used to being able to bake in because those things are so tightly coupled. Removing those design decisions results in an end user experience they're not comfortable with because it sort of homogenizes everything.
They feel a lack of control.
Right, and we're having to walk them through the process of learning how to tease out the editorial decisions that they're used to communicating as design decisions, but really they're about emphasis and prioritization and connections between things, learning how to tease those out of the design thinking layer and turn them into structural thinking that can live in those different places regardless of what the end design is that reflects it. That's actually one of the things that we have to spend more time than anything on right now to get people over that hurdle.
Yeah, and I think that's where the real challenges are now, and I think that those challenges aren't going to go away necessarily, and they're going to and I don't mean not going to go away anytime soon. I don't think they're ever going to go away.
Well, they're the work of actually building things.
Yeah. I mean, and so people aren't. I mean, on the other hand, there's people seem to be relatively comfortable with writing a Word document and handing that off to somebody else to turn into a web page. So, maybe there's some analogies there in which instead of having sort of this weird a backend that still kind of looks like WinForms, right? Turning it into making that authoring experience like Medium, right? But not necessarily an in-place editor. Or, and I know you're going to disagree on this, allow them to actually just edit their content on the front end of their web page, what they're used to, and that they can grok. But kind of giving them their keeping that comfortableness, right? But not giving them the ability to break out of the semantic structures, right? And I think that I'm really interested in what are the opportunities for some of that in-place editing stuff to actually become a bridge for this. There's sort of mental model problems on that, but I mean, my experience has been that those mental model problems, they don't go away. You can't, they're always there. Right?
They're reinforced by consumer level web experiences.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the truth, is that there are specific experiences with platforms that are completely devoted to curating a simple experience. Right. You know what I mean? And ours have to be much more multi-purpose. And that's the hardest thing we actually run into, is the input of content through each of these different devices and having to deal with validation and that kind of stuff on the flip side. That's the part that costs us the most. Is difficult.
Over here.
Diana.
Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.
So I guess I wanted to add that I've gotten pushed out of this space in both directions, back end and front end. That content was defined, or in CMS is defined as the relationships in the database, right? It's relational. So now you do reporting. And the authoring is set, and the way that content is related in the database is done with the right kind of thinking for the content that you want to save and deliver. But now you're reporting and those relationships don't exist, right? So pulling content out, using Mongo, whatever, layering on the back end specifically for delivering different kinds of relationships, not strictly the way the application does. And then in the front end, not all content, a lot of content is disposable now. The relationship of the content is in this space, on this page. I want, a top 10 list. I don't need that to have a relationship to the content of the database. I need it to have a relationship to the front end layer. Right? And so I guess I was thinking about, thoughts about that. How much is this related to being limited by content has to have a relationship within the back-end application that pushes out the need for more layering and not just the device.
How does that top 10 list live on Google Glass?
How does the content live on Google Glass?
That top 10 list.
I don't know anything about Google Glass.
Oh, okay. How does that?
No, it wasn't really the point.
I think there's a point here that I can add to with Eden in that the word content in the middle is hard because for me that's data, and I talk about it as data always, and that confuses the people when I do that, right? Once you say content, you actually mean markup for web or markup for mobile or markup for wearable or that sort of thing.
I'd actually disagree.
And
so that's a representation of the content.
That's a representation.
From the authoring experience, though, that data has to be entered, right? And semantically, if we want to get to semantic web, we're going to have people who are going to break all of those things up into all their individual pieces, and then have them put metadata against all of those individual pieces. right? So that's the long form. Then maybe you get another entry next to it with another tab that says display type number 1, and now I can go into WYSIWYG and reassemble those things into a display. But unless you break all those things up, I can't deliver you the Google Glass data that you actually want, because it's parsed into a semantic relationship already. It has an RDF relationship with something else.
So I think that a lot of that, so that's a really complicated question, right? And it's really, and it's also really specific to the content strategy and to how that content is related. So I could very much see that that the layout, like let's say of a page, is in itself a way of defining semantic relationships, right? Go ahead.
I'm just gonna
explode.
Yeah. So one way to make those, just to finish the thought, like one way to make those relationships, right, is to not say like entity relationship field, but if you take a picture and you put it onto a page with a paragraph of text, then those two things are then related, and it doesn't matter how the user is moving that stuff around necessarily, right? You can make this abstraction for them that looks like a table or looks like, I don't know, some virtual reality thing, right? And as long as when you store it, that relationship is stored and you can get that relationship back, the relationship between that paragraph of text and that image can then be represented, in a different format. Right?
I won't belabor it, but I will just give a brief plug for the Battle for the Body Field. It's like an article, like a session of for 2 hours yesterday about that thing specifically. I mean, it's an area that outside of web publishing, in like the tech comm and marketing communication space, has like 20 years of hard thinking about the philosophy of how you capture that stuff in a way that doesn't break down when you repurpose it, and it's nothing that we can't reuse as we start encountering these problems.
Absolutely,
but like
100%.
The idea of a page as something that you design in a visual sense versus a page as a particular intent for communication that you are creating out of messages and elements that you're combining and relating and prioritizing. The end result on a particular website may look the same, but for repurposing and for redistributing in different mediums, thinking about it in terms of messages and priorities and relationships and perhaps the ephemeral pieces that support that in one context, but like not just muddling that into this big blob we call a page.
Yeah, and I think it's
so
really.
I'm gonna have to. We're at the top of the hour, so I have to be respectful of everybody who needs to either go back to work or go back to DrupalCon. But I want to leave you with just a couple of thoughts. So to summarize some of the things that we wanted to, the seeds we wanted to plant, and the controversies we wanted to sort of suss out today. The two design philosophies of who gets to win, the user or the people who own the website. This is potentially a third way, where both can win, right? Additionally, regaining the primacy of content in a content management system so that it's not a website management system. If you need to manage your community or your website or whatever, there will be tools for that, but a content management system should be about content first, right? And then thirdly, recognizing that there are in fact multiple front ends and that the web markup is just one of who knows how many haven't even been invented yet. So thank you so much for coming. Please feel free to stick around if you want to keep talking for a little while. I don't know how long we have the room, probably not too much longer, but we can always go back to the conference center and talk. Thank you so very much, and let's try and figure out a way to solve this together as a community. Thank you.